Oh, hi. There we go. Hi, guys. How's it going? I remember I took this class last year, so it's exciting to be back. So I want to talk to you. Here it is. So, quick poll. How many guys here took part in No Shave November? Awesome. More hands than I was expecting. Girls, how many of you are ready for this to be over? Yeah, okay. So, just really quickly, I have one last hurrah for any guy who's really proud and wants to show it. This is the Virginia Tech Beard Fest. We're in our second annual year, and it is the annual beard pageant to raise money for prostate cancer. The logic is October is often seen as a month to raise money for breast cancer, which is a phenomenal cause, but prostate cancer, which kills just as many men respectively, kind of goes under the radar. So this is kind of our way to make it heard and kind of spread the news about it. It's a really super fun event. Basically, contestants go up there. We have patchy beard, baby face for those who tried, and just couldn't. The mustache category, the winner for mustache last year trimmed the handlebars and got the bowler cap and did the whole thing. It was awesome. And we have prizes, and we have going to be food, and the way to vote is that each contestant will have a shave it or a save it jar. And people in the audience have to put money in respective jars. And if you sign up and get more in your save it jar, you are committed to keep it through the end of finals. However, if you get in your shave it jar, then people on stage will be shaving your beard off after the pageant. So, girlfriends out there, if you're sick and tired of it, this might be a fun way to do it. If anyone is interested in competing, you can still register. Just go to any of these sites here. If you can't see, it is facebook.com/beardmidi, like committee with a beard, or gobblerconnect.vt.edu, organization beards. You can register on either one. We have about 20 contestants right now, looking for more. Or if you just want to come to watch, it's this Saturday at 7 in Hillcrest Dining Room. So hope to see you all there, and stay hairy.
Let's get back to them. I'm the one that usually says the inappropriate things. Darn it. Stay hairy. That's awesome. But I don't understand how the women are supposed to participate in this. And Oh, okay. I thought there'd be a public shaving for that too. I'm just saying. There you go. I one-upped you in the inappropriate category. That's what I had to do. Okay, hey, how's everybody doing today? Yes! Now we're down to the 500, the good students. How many people already have an A or are coasting for the next week, 2 weeks into an A? Cheer it. Don't even raise the hands. Just cheer it out. How many people are coasting down now? How many people might have to work a little bit more, but you're going to get an A anyway? There you go. And that's the students that are here, and this is the ones that, of course, I want to lecture to and have a good time with. So are you sure you don't want to move to McBride 100, a smaller venue? You do want to move? Ah, darn it. All right. We'll continue to have a gigantic auditorium for 500 of the hardcore students for the last couple weeks of class. And we are down to the last couple weeks of class. After tonight, just 2 more Wednesdays. Is it just me, or is class going late this semester? Last day of class is 2 weeks from today. That's pretty late. Usually we're already into exams by then, so hang tough. 2 Wednesdays to go, 11 Wednesdays under the belt. Everybody up with quizzes? How many quizzes do we have left, weekly quizzes? 2 more. Okay, 2 more. 2 more weekly quizzes. Tonight's film, Goodbye Lenin, which I've already shown twice. How many people come into the film afterwards? Wow, okay. All right. By the way, we're getting to the point that I don't know that you need tickets anymore. So if you didn't sign up for a ticket, you still want to come to the movie, that's cool. We have fewer and fewer people showing up for films, which is good. I'm thinking that's good because that means everybody got all the films they needed. I knew there was a big high-pressure demand for films at the beginning of the semester, and lots of people were panicking because they couldn't get into a film. But now it looks like it's all chilled out, and we have plenty of space at films. Although I'm going to tell you a heads up next week, I'm going to show some crazy ones, including City of God. If you have not seen City of God from Brazil, even if you don't need a movie, you might want to come see that one. It's that good. Other than that, how's everybody's points looking? We're all doing good. Any concerns about class? Questions about stuff? Yes? I'm sorry. I don't know what the hell just happened. What are you people cheering about? I was talking to this guy over here. What was extra credit for what? For just being you? For just showing up? The lecture itself is not enough love for you? I don't really think anybody in this room needs extra credit. Really? Really? Is there anybody in this room that has like less than 600 points? That's actually heartwarming. That makes me feel good that you're here just to get extra credit for showing up to class. Here I thought it was the diehard who just come for the love of the game. For the love of the game, let's hear those people. Yeah! You want both. I already have an A and I want more credit. More extra double credit. I'll think about the extra credit. Hold off on that. And your question again was about the atlases?
Yes, because when I, like a week or two ago, when I went to, again, I'm still missing before.
How many people have been to the library? They actually ordered more copies of the atlases.
I got a copy out like 2 days ago.
Yeah. The atlases are really old. They're like 2 years old. Maybe that's really old in your years, but in my years, it's not that bad. By the way, for those of you who's just said you only have 600 points or less, the Atlas exercise is like 110 points once you do them all, but I'm not going to lie, they're time consuming, and that's intentional. They are work because you should probably have done something more interesting than the Atlas quizzes to earn 100 points. But if you really need 100 points, you can go learn about world stuff through the Atlas quizzes. So it's not too late for that, but time is running out. And there should be double the amount of atlases on reserve at the library now. Yes, sir? Can I do a... Yeah, you want another World Leaders exam? I will let the die-hard 500 that come to class decide how we'll do that. Let me hear a chorus of screams. How many people would like to do the World Leader exam? Didn't let me finish. Hold on. How many people would like to do the World Leaders exam here in class like we did it last time? In this room. How many people would like to do the World Leaders exam online? How about on, say, reading day? Sure. All right, what day then? You tell me. The last day of class is Wednesday. Reading day is the next day. So when would you like to do that exam? You want to do it Wednesday night, right after class? Once again, we have to let the democracy decide, and of course, I'm a dictator that may overrule it. How many people only vote once? Wednesday night after the last class, let's do the online World Leaders quiz. Cheer for that if you want it. Wednesday night after the last class. How many people want Thursday reading day? All right, vote one more time, vote one more time. How many want it afternoon reading day? How many want it later evening reading day? Oh, okay. How many people want it morning reading day? I just assumed that, all right? I wasn't going to ask that. All right, so maybe that was kind of indecisive, and we will allow some of our online people, hello online people, who are not here to vote, so maybe I'll put out a survey. I'll send out a survey and let you guys choose when we do the online World Leader exam. Cool? Okay. All right. Anything else? Any other mechanics, course mechanics? Let's wrap this sucker up then. Is anything going on in the news you'd like to talk about?
Yes, sir, ARPA's being exhumed.
Okay, a dead guy is getting pulled out of his grave. Not too pertinent to current events, but that is true. For those of you who don't know who Yasser Arafat is, he used to be the president, or the leader, I guess we should say, of Palestine for a very, very, very long time. He's the dude who, if you've ever seen pictures of a guy that's wearing like a tablecloth on his head, it's that dude. Checkered tablecloth as a hat. But he died, I guess, 5 or 6 or 7 years ago, and they're exhuming his body because there is some rumor that there was foul play and that possibly he was poisoned by some Israeli secret agents or something. So I don't know what that would serve to find that out, but apparently they're going to exhume his body. Yeah.
The dictator's wife, the Cambodia's wife, dictator, the way he greeted Obama.
Say that again?
The way the dictator's wife in Cambodia greeted Obama.
A dictator in Cambodia's wife?
The wife.
She did what?
The way she greeted her, she actually greeted the way that they greet servants.
Oh, can you send me that story? I've not heard anything about that. Here's the bigger note, though. Final exam question. What did President Barack Obama do pretty much for the first week after the election? Anybody know what he did? He's been traveling. What part of the planet did President Barack Obama travel to right after the election? Southeast Asia. He was on a powerhouse Southeast Asian tour. Please know it, live it, learn it, love it. Went to the ASEAN meeting, the ASEAN +3 meeting, the EAS meeting. Hopefully all of these things mean something to you at this point in class. If they don't, just put your head down quietly. Southeast Asia is on fire right now. Everybody wants a piece of Southeast Asia. It is becoming an epicenter of economic and political action within the whole Pacific Asian realm right now. It is something I've talked about in different classes. Let's make another exam question out of it somehow. China is definitely rich. When I say China, you say, okay, of course. But China ain't the only country around there. It's not the only rich country. And even though China's happening and hustling and their economy's still going full bore and they're getting richer and more awesome, Southeast Asia looks like the place that a lot more people are going to go to form up economic unions, of which China may or may not be a player, political unions, of which China may or may not be a player. Thank you. And so I do want you to understand this. If you haven't got this already from previous talks or lectures or online stuff, feels like an exam question. ASEAN is shaping up very quickly into something more like an Asian EU. Let me say that again. ASEAN, China's rich, all right? China's awesome. But ASEAN looks like it's forming into a European Union of Asia. China will probably be a part of it, all right? But what I'm trying to stress here is the epicenter of this action is in ASEAN. I think it's a very awesome thing, quite frankly. I'm going to go ahead and show you my cards here. I think there could be no greater movement forward for Asia in general, in Southeast Asia specifically, than ASEAN becoming an even tighter-knit group politically and economically. Everybody loves the economics. Oh, we all want to sell more crap. This will be great. We'll have a free trade area. We'll sell more stuff. That's nice. But I do want you to know, and I'll say it for the 100th time, ASEAN looks more something like an EU where they're integrating not just economic stuff, but more and more economic or more and more political integration. They're talking about common kind of human rights bill across ASEAN nations and common, say, electrical grid, common airspace. They already have many of these things. So it is doing something that China alone is not doing, and that is further integration on various levels. And that's a really cool thing. Once countries tie themselves together politically and economically, they typically don't do what anymore? They typically don't fight each other anymore. And usually the standards of all of them, the bar gets raised. So there's been dictatorships and genocides have occurred in Southeast Asia in the last 40 years. And the further these guys tighten the ASEAN unit, the less likelihood that there's going to be any more civil war, genocide, interstate conflict. That stuff's going away the tighter this unit pulls together. And indeed, the reason that President Barack Obama is there is because he knows it. And everyone in the U.S. is like, oh, that's the place to watch. And the U.S. doesn't want to get left behind. China's rich, and China can be a powerful player in this ASEAN, bigger kind of Asian unit. The U.S. doesn't want to be left behind. That's why they were there. He was there with Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. Feels like a visual exam question. Hillary Clinton, I think before we did Thanksgiving break, did I not mention where Hillary Clinton and Leon Panetta were before Thanksgiving break? Does that make sense? They were down in Australia setting up some space stuff, all right, and talking about further military integration with Australia. And lo and behold, a week later, Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama are in Southeast Asia. This is where the action is, friends. I mean, I have all kinds of great lectures prepared for this class. I have endless, hundreds of hours of lecture I could give you on regions, but this is where the excitement is. I want you to know what's going on right the hell now. In Southeast Asia is happening right the hell now. The whole Pacific Rim is happening right the hell now. Australia is happening right the hell now, all right? This is the excitement. Okay, enough said about that. And again, the U.S. doesn't want to get left behind. That's why all of your major leaders have been there for most of the last month. All right? Question online.
What does it take for ASEAN to get a currency, one currency?
Someone online asked, what will it take for ASEAN to get some sort of standardized currency? That's a fantastic question. Let's make it into another exam question. That's not likely to happen. It's not likely to happen that ASEAN's going to come up with a euro-type currency. There's a couple of different reasons for this, and this is really going to make you kind of smarter about today's world. There are actually several reasons. Let me see what reasons you think there are. Why do you think, or why would you think that I think that ASEAN is not likely to have a common currency? Yeah.
We're seeing what's happening with the EU right now.
Look at the common currency debacle in Europe right now. Who the hell is going to sign up for a system that's actually failing right this second? So that's number one. Feels like an exam question like it. Yes? Their economies are pretty radically different. Although, just the ASEAN core, it's like, yeah, they're more similar than different, but they do different things. But you could argue that European countries do different things, but they have a common currency. Yep. Do you have a... I thought you had a comment. Any other? Yes?
Current events.
What's that?
New current events. Qatar has decided to help Hamas.
Oh, wait. Let me finish this. I'm right in the middle of giving you this exam questions. We'll come back to Hamas, all right? Why else would I suggest that we're not going to have a common currency in ASEAN? Okay? None of the ASEAN players are really individually huge in the global economy. None of the ASEAN players' currencies are that big a deal in the global economy. Okay? Whose is? China. What you're likely to see is not a new currency in ASEAN. It's that they would adopt a singular currency like the Chinese yuan as their common currency. They might say, yes, we're going to go with yuan, not the US dollar. And that's another reason why President Barack Obama was hanging out over there, because he don't want that neither. Right? Is this starting to make a little bit more sense? So the Southeast Asian countries, while they're happening and they're getting richer and things are going well, none of them are big enough that they have a currency that's that big a deal. They wouldn't bother making one. They would adopt a bigger one like the Chinese currency. And I did want to put a kind of highlight note after this. We are likely to live through a major shift in the global currency system. And the shift I'm referencing, that might be a test question, is that what do you think, what's your natural inclination? Without knowing global finance, tell me, all of you World Regions peeps, what is the major global currency? The US dollar. The US dollar is the standard worldwide. Do you think it's going to be 20 years from now? America, all right? Do you think it will be 10 years from now? It is debatable. it is debatable if the US dollar will maintain its position as the global currency of default. Who is likely to displace them? China, right? That's very likely to happen. And right now, for those of you that aren't into finance and not interested in it, just hang on. When you talk about the price of a barrel of oil, that's tagged to US dollars. When you talk about global currency exchange, you're saying, hey, I'm going to sell my Swiss francs and transfer them into this other denomination. They're all tagged to US dollars. That's how the conversions happen. Even banknotes from the IMF and the World Bank, they're tagged to US dollars. You are likely to live through this age where that starts to happen less, and more global institutions and supranationalist organizations say, yeah, we're not going to tie to the US dollar anymore. In fact, let me give you a few exam questions, some easy ones. Some places that have hinted about getting off the US dollar are OPEC, Mercosur, many Latin American countries, and one that's pertinent to tonight's lecture, the SCO. Oh, has anybody learned anything about the SCO yet? I gave you a flash quiz on it. Let me hear some SCO love. How many people did that flash quiz? You know who the SCO is. All right, excellent. Here's where it gets fun. The last 2 times the SCO, that is the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, has gotten together, the last 2 times, they have talked about forming their own common currency. They have openly talked about rejecting the US dollar. Both China and Russia have said, yeah, maybe we need to chuck out the US dollar and tie to the Chinese yuan. I mean, they're openly talking about it. So OPEC, Mercosur, SCO are ones that I know of personally that are like, yeah, we can do without the US dollar. All right, that makes sense? So it's kind of a big deal. The U.S. would lose, for those of you that have no clue why this is important, the U.S. can print money all day long if it wants to. The U.S. government can just print money. Oh, we're in debt? Print more money and pay it off with the dollar bills we just printed. It's because we're the global standard. We have a very unique position on the planet. If the U.S. Treasury tomorrow were to print another $1 trillion worth of currency, the world would adjust to that. And we would have $1 trillion for what? For nothing. We just printed it. If the US dollar, people stop pegging to the US dollar, you can't do that anymore. The US will not have that ability to say, oh, we'll just print another $10 trillion when we're broke. You can't do that if the whole world will not accept it. Because if you print $1 trillion just on a whim and the rest of the world's not tagged to your currency, everybody's like, okay, your money, the US dollar is worth nothing now. You're flooding the market with too many US dollars that we don't care about it anymore, and so it's going to go down in value. That has immediate repercussions for the US economy and the global economy. Does that make little sense? I'm not a finance expert, by the way, but I know a little bit about a few things. Cool? Okay? All right, yes?
So can we move on to a different now?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, how about gas?
Yes, he was going to say something about that. Go ahead, Mohammed.
What about BRIC nations? Because BRICS has China and Russia too.
Yes, the BRIC nations, the BRIC, but they don't actually have a constitution or rules or anything. They're just a talking group is what I'd call them. Feels like an exam question. The BRIC is just a talking group. The BRIC, that's a term that was made up by some investment broker in Great Britain, I think. And it was made up as a place that he was saying, oh, these are the places you want to invest your money. Brazil, Russia, India, China. They're happening economies, they're growing. Here's why these places are hot. It's an acronym we've just all picked up on. And just in the last couple of years, the BRIC countries themselves said, hey, maybe we should have a meeting or some shit. They don't have any rules or protocol. They have nothing. They might eventually, but they don't right now. So they couldn't just say we're not going to accept the US dollar because they're not a group, they're not a real group, if that makes any sense. The SCO, on the other hand, is a trade military partnership. And so they can say, we're not going to deal with US dollars anymore. We're going to tie to the yuan for all our trade negotiations. Okay? But you wanted to say something about Hamas and the Gaza Strip or something?
Yeah, it was Qatar. Recently, they decided to help fund Hamas
Qatar is going to fund Hamas.
Like publicly, they want to help Hamas.
Okay.
Yeah. But Iran thinks that's the move that tries to distance Iran from helping Hamas. And Iran thinks Hamas, thinks Qatar doesn't want good things for Hamas.
Yes.
Because Qatar is holding Israeli embassy.
You're talking about some very complicated things. You're throwing out a lot of terms, and that's why I love you. All right. But let's wait until we get to the Middle Eastern lecture, and hopefully some of you have started to pick up some of these terms, like Hamas and Fatah and Iran's role with Hezbollah through some of the readings you've done and other videos. But we better hold off on that, and the Gaza Strip one. Because they're very complicated. We need to talk about Israel and the whole Palestinian situation before we start talking about current events and throwing out terms. But let me give you this current event for an exam question. Does anybody know what's going on at the United Nations right now in respect to Palestine? That's very big news.
Spain has just volunteered to back Palestine becoming statehood and a bunch of other.
Spain did, really?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't even know that. So this feels like a really tricky exam question. Someone in the front row was saying that Spain, Spain in Europe, Team West, that Spain is backing Palestine's bid to get some sort of recognition.
So is Switzerland and Denmark.
Switzerland and Denmark are on board too. They're actually just 3 countries in Europe. I'm not even worried about them.
Germany's definitely saying
The exam question, the thing I want you to know here is that it looks as if Palestine in the General Assembly, let me choose my words carefully here for this exam question. The General Assembly of the United Nations is going to pass some sort of resolution giving limited recognition to Palestine. Everybody follow me there? The General Assembly of the United Nations is going to pass something that gives limited recognition to Palestine. Not full state recognition, but more recognition that they will have more powers or more voting power at the United Nations and more power to do things that, say, the International Criminal Court and other international bodies. Now, what did I not say? Is Palestine a state? No. After they pass this through the General Assembly, is Palestine a state? No. If it were to be taken to the UN Permanent Security Council, would Palestine be a state? No, why not? The U.S. would veto it, okay? So it's not even, they're not even attempting to do that. They're not attempting to become a full-on state. They've given up on that. The new tactic is get as much limited recognition as possible through the United Nations General Assembly and start working via back channels. That's kind of big news. And the reason that I pointed out Spain as a possible exam question is that's interesting that some European countries are backing this play, because most European countries are going to side with the United States in not backing that play. Make sense? Okay? All right. Anything else big? There's lots of good news, as there always is, or lots of interesting news, I should say. But we should probably try to get through this Russia lecture since we've been doing it for 6.5 months. And I don't even think we're to World War I yet. But that's the fun of it, I think, anyway. I love coming and talking to class. And I love having this interaction. And as I've suggested, and I'd love to get feedback from you all, I want to get to a point where I have all of this type of lecture pre-recorded, and you just watch it, and I give you flash quizzes on it. And then when we come to class, we just do all current events. How many people would sign up for that class? Just do everything's pre-canned, and you quizzes on it, and then we just come and have interaction. That's what I'm working towards, but we're not there yet. So let me finish my lecture on Russia with as much input from you all as possible. It seems like we were talking about brand new century, brand new bear. For those of you in the back that can't read this, it says in Soviet Russia, picnic basket is stolen by you. I'm not even sure I get it. And in Soviet Russia, you attack bear. I guess that shit's real. I don't know. Maybe that's Putin on a bad day. I think we left off somewhere around here, though. Somebody stop me when we get to where we got to. Is this ringing any bells? Ringing any bells? World War I was disastrous for the Ruskies. I think I gave you an exam question, something to the effect of, who came to power largely under a banner of, I'll get you out of World War I? Vladimir Lenin, the wonderful half-bald man shown up there in the upper left or upper right corner. He kind of campaigned in Russia as, hey, get me in power, get us Bolshevik commies in power, we'll get you out of World War I. When he came into power in the Communist Revolution in 1917, that was the first order of business. He walked in and said, we're done. Germany, we surrender all lands that you currently have of ours. We don't care. We're walking away. Now, was he really giving those lands away permanently? No. What do you think Vladimir's real intent there was? Vladimir Lenin wanted to put Russia's house in order, put their house in order, throw out the monarchy, have a revolution, start this communist utopia, and once they got their shit together, go back and get their land in Eastern Europe. That was always the intent. It was a pretty wise move on his part, by the way. Because if I didn't express this last class, let me express it now. World War I was wildly unpopular with the average Russian, as was the Russo-Japanese War, which they also lost. So you're talking about walking into the 20th century, Russia just has been getting the shit kicked out of them right from the get-go. Then they have this commie revolution, which kind of divides the country because not everybody wanted to be communists. In fact, the average Russian didn't know what communists were when Vladimir Lenin came rolling back into town and took over this government. They kind of actually did it through some political trickery, where they said, hey, we're the Bolsheviks, we're the majority party in the Congress, and so we're going to pass some quick laws, and hey, we're the majority party. No, they weren't. They were a handful of people. But they kind of finagled their way in, and through a seizure of power, they became the majority party. They took over. Okay? And then, of course, I think we left off with their purge of the royal family because they immediately then go into a civil war scenario. Did I get this far? We did talk about the Reds versus the Whites. Why do I have this recollection that I told you about the Mad Monk on our way out of here? I was talking about Rasputin on our way out. Dying of drowning after getting the shit kicked out of him and stabbed and poisoned and shot and pretty much indestructible. So we get to the Civil War, in which the whites were the loyalists who said, no, we don't want this commie nonsense. So it was the Red Army versus the White Army. I remember now how I got to it. I got my track back on. Was talking about the Civil War and how the first thing Lenin did was assassinate the whole royal family. That's where it was, right? Yes, even poor little Anastasia, who died of lead bullet poisoning. All right, so all of them, the royals were dead so that no one could return back to monarchy even if the communist forces lost. Okay? And that's where we got the Rasputin. He was killed actually before the Civil War started. But this was a pretty brutal, short little civil war. Maybe a couple million people dead in this bid for power to control the Russian state. And it was followed by, because the fun just never ends for Russia, it was followed by a couple of really horrific winters of mass starvation. Russia's a cold damn place. We've established that. So to have a winter so brutal as it just destroys 50% of the crops, it must be horrifically cold. And they had two of them back to back. So you had horrific weather followed by starvation because the crops didn't come in. Boy, does the fun ever end in Russia. Well, no, not quite yet. Because the kind of final capper of pain in the early 20th century is that good old Vladimir Lenin dies. And this is a turning point for Russia that a lot of people don't give enough credit to. Why was this a turning point? What was the big deal about Lenin dying? We might say, yay, a commie died. And so that's always a good thing. Better dead than red. But this was actually really bad for the Soviets. Why? Yep. He didn't designate as his successor, and so who became his successor? Yay! Joseph Stalin, one of the most batshit crazy people of the 20th century, who was paranoid, schizophrenic, probably by his mid-40s, who killed many of his own citizens, and something called the Great Terror, or maybe the Red Terror, and you might hear it referred to as the Great Purge, where he became so schizophrenic, he said, oh, in a bid to make sure that I have power forever, I'm going to kill everybody who's ever disagreed with me ever, and all of their relatives, and all of their neighbors too, just in case they talk to their neighbors. You know what? Let's kill all the cats and dogs that all these people owned as well. And Stalin also did these wonderful programs to keep the population destabilized so that nobody would overthrow him. Things like, feels like a test question, deporting people from one side of the Russian Empire to the other just for the hell of it. So he would take whole groups of people who weren't Russian, ethnically, and in a bid to mix up the melting pot, he would take all the Estonians and move them over to the Kamchatka Peninsula on the other side of Asia. And he would take all the Chechens and put them on trains and move them to Siberia. And he moved Kazakhs over to Poland. So he was trying to mix up this great big stew of ethnicity, which in the long run has hugely backfired. It's one of the reasons why Chechen people despise the Russians to this day. And many of them migrated home over the decades to get back to Chechnya. And in the process, of course, millions of people died in these purges and mass forced migrations, and in some pretty bad policy that culminated in forced agricultural collectivization, which if people, he would go in and say, hey, get off the land, or give it to the great Mother Russia, Soviet state, and if people said, no, it's my land, it's been my family for 100 years, he'd be like, okay, how about this then, you're dead. So pretty brutal policies throughout most of the Stalin era, resulting in untold millions of people dead. And I'm talking within Russia, we're not talking about world wars or anything else, okay? So this guy was cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs, and lots of people suffered. He is regularly counted as the biggest bastard, biggest, worst dictator of the 20th century. He certainly is in the top three. It is a toss-up as to whether he or Hitler killed more people. A competition no one really wants to know the answer to, but he's definitely in the running, okay? Having said that, jot this down in your notes. Here it goes. Did this guy do anything good for Russia? What did he do? He did oversee mass industrialization and modernization of Russia in a huge way. Now, whether communism has anything to do with it, who gives a shit? It was a forced communist state. The state controlled everything, and being able to control everything, it could force people to do everything. You could force factories to be built here, and farms to be here, and you will do this, and you will do that. And that's stuff that strikes us as kind of nasty. That doesn't sound very cool to us, because we're all about individual rights. But when you can control all of the levers of a society, you can do big things. You can do great projects. You can force things to happen very quickly. And quite frankly, even though I consider him the biggest bastard of the 20th century, he did do a lot to modernize and industrialize Russia. And they did become a world power under Stalin's reign. They were not a world power before. They were falling apart. Again, look at the list. This place was falling apart. Even right up to when Lenin died, it still was very unstable. Stalin stabilized it, he industrialized it, he modernized it. When we think of Russia as a world power, the huge military and a space program and tanks and rockets and guns and modern infrastructure, that shit all happened under him. So even a crazy bastard like him, I guess, has a silver lining. Feels like another easy exam question. It's one of the reasons why when you go ask Russian people today, right now, today, and they've done this several years ago, they said, hey, Russian people, we're going to do an informal survey. How many of you think that Stalin was cool? The last time they did this, 45% of Russians said, we think he's cool. Totally all right. Something on the order of 75% of them said, yes, he was great for Russia. The dude killed millions of people. Thumbs up, baby. There's something about the Russian mentality, and I'm going to apologize to my Russian friends because I'm not Russian, so I shouldn't be talking about your mentality, but there is something to the Russian mentality that does kind of like very, very strong leaders. Like who? How about Vladimir Putin? How about Vladimir Putin 60 years after Stalin died? Okay? They really gravitate towards strong, centralized, badassery leaders. Yeah, so he killed a few million people. He was good. He was great for the country. We became a world power and kicked ass. So there actually is a resonating, it's actually growing, a growing sentiment in Russia here right now, 21st century, that he was a pretty good guy. Most of us in the outside world are like, what? Really? Okay. We think he was crazy and a murderer. Yeah, for us, he was a good guy. Okay, so do keep that in mind. By the way, not all Russians. There are some Russians who are like, no, he was batshit crazy and killed my great-grandfather, all right? But a surprising percentage of people say, no, he was a hero of Russian history. And it is hard to not see that under his reign, Russia did become this world power. I should say the Soviet Union, I'm sorry. Soviet Union became a world power. Okay, so 1924 to 1953, Stalin in power. Of course, that's going to bring us up to World War II, when Stalin was still in charge, when that delightful thing broke out. Stalin, I'm sorry, you have a question? Oh. Stalin originally, God, thanks for that, Katie. Stalin originally, write this down in your notes if you don't know it already, sided up with who before World War II started? The Germans and Hitler. So if you don't know, yeah, I got it. They had something called the Non-Aggression Pact that, in what must have been the most awesome, fun party ever, Stalin and Hitler got together. Dude, where's the disco ball at? Let's get this party on. They got together prior to World War II, and Hitler said, okay, here's the deal, Stalin. We're both kind of freaking crazy. Love ya. And we're going to take over the world. Yeah, Germans are going to take over the world. But here's the deal. We won't screw with you as long as you don't stop us from taking over the world. Not you, of course. We're not going to take over the Soviet Union. We'll take over everything else. So if you don't mess with us while we do that, we won't take over you. And Stalin, being a pretty wise guy, was like, okay, sure. Yeah, sounds good. However, both of them being batshit crazy, that pact was not going to hold. Anybody know the end of that story, what happened with this pact? Yeah?
Hitler invaded Russia.
Yeah, Hitler decided to change his mind, which insane people have a tendency to do, and renege on the contract. So the USSR originally started out not as helping the Nazis, but as a pact of non-aggression, non-aggressive. We won't get in your way. Go ahead, kill all the Europeans. We think they suck anyway, because they keep messing with us and we don't like them. You also might remember, hey, there, look at that. Fun times right there. By the way, what else do these two guys have in common besides awesome facial hair and their love of killing humans? Does anybody know what else they have in common? They don't drink. They were teetotalers. They don't drink. Think about that. Go have a drink, all right? Don't turn out like these guys. All right, which is why Stalin started with non-aggression with the Germans, saying, go ahead, kill all the people you want. But once Hitler attacked him, then Stalin joined the good guy team, which is why you see him in pictures like this with Churchill and FDR. All right, so let's get to this. Originally, German USSR signed that Pact of Non-Aggression in 1939. Hitler, being a dumbass, decided to go ahead and attack him, thus pulling the Soviet Union into the war on the side of the Allies. And Hitler learned the great lesson that great leaders before him had learned, which is never invade Russia. You're always going to lose. So it actually probably was the case that had Hitler not been dumb enough to invade Russia, history would have been very different. Very different. Because not only did he pull in another power to start kicking the Germans' asses, he had to divert his forces to start fighting that other front in Russia. And it was a brutal front, terrible front. Think about the Russian winters that we've talked about. That is usually why invading armies always lose when they invade Russia. It's easy to go take over Moscow. It's impossible to hold on to it because you're going to have to stay there. And who the hell wants to do that besides the Russians? So Napoleon learned this when he tried to invade and got his ass froze out. And then Hitler did. But do note this, the Eastern Front was brutal. Not that the Western Front was a fun time. Millions of people died on the Western Front in Europe. But I think this is largely undervalued. Most of the death in World War II happened on the Eastern Front, and that's the fighting between the Soviets and the Germans. Does everybody know this already? This is probably the smart bunch of people. That's why you come to class, except for those people who want an extra credit. So you probably already know this, but the death tolls were horrific in Western Europe. They were horrific to an exponent in Eastern Europe. The Germans fighting the Russians was a freaking bloodbath. A bloodbath. They don't even know how many people died. Maybe 10 to 20 million Russians dead on the Eastern Front. Maybe as many Germans. There was parts in places like the Siege of Stalingrad. If anyone's seen the movie called Stalingrad, there's several different movie versions. By the end of this siege, the Germans were fighting the Soviets in the streets of Stalingrad in the middle of winter, beating each other to death with shovels. They were out of ammunition. They were just going door to door, killing each other with axes and shit. You're like, shit was crazy. The death toll was horrific. Tens of millions dead on that front. Jot it down in your brain if you didn't know it already. I think you got to give cred to the Russians. Without their involvement in World War II, way many more Americans would have died. Way many more British would have died. Probably the same amount of Frenchmen because they would have surrendered, all right? But the death toll would have been way worse because Hitler's forces would have been concentrated more in Western Europe proper. The Russians basically bled the Germans to death over in that Eastern Front. And that was where the biggest casualty count was. Nasty, terrible part of the war. I think that the Russians I should say the Soviets, really played the biggest part in defeating the Germans. I know it sounds terrible because from America, so obviously we did it all. But without Russian involvement, you're looking at a whole different ballgame. They really beat the hell out of the Germans after taking severe casualties themselves. Okay? And that's why Stalin is at the table negotiating after the war was over. All right, so, whoa, Jesus, that happened way too fast. So the Allies meet in World War II. For those of you that have already sat through the movie that I'm showing again later tonight, you've already seen this exact slide. But the Soviets come in from the east, the good guys come in from the west, and everybody high fives in the middle of Europe after killing Nazis and scalping them, just like Brad Pitt, all right? So that's how we had the situation that, yay, we're all happy, Germany split up. They're destroyed. We'll have an East Germany and a West Germany. And the Soviets will stay here and mop up action over in the East. And the good guys will mop up action over in the West. And we'll all just be famous friends. And this is great. And yay, let's have a Malta conference and decide who gets what. Now, that also was the exact moment that these parties started hating each other's guts. Because we never really trusted the commies, because we don't like commies. And the commies never really trusted us because they don't like us. Not so much that they hated Americans. America never did shit to Russia or to the communist cause. The commies really didn't like the Europeans. Why would that be? Why would the Soviets not really be keen on the Europeans? Yeah. Yeah, the Europeans pulled their asses into World War I, and they got spanked there. And even before that, Napoleon had invaded Russia and spanked them there. And all of the European powers were forever plotting against Russia to try to minimize their influence. So Russia actually went to war with places like Turkey off and on, and the Europeans would help Turkey. And the Russians would try to gain territory or property, say in like Afghanistan. And the British and other people would help the locals rise up against the Russians. So this is an ongoing historical thing that I'm not trying to bore you with history, but I want you to understand the Ruskies never really trusted the Europeans. I'm not sure they do to this day. And there is some historical reasons for that. So when all of this went down, right after the war's over, Nazis all dead, The Soviets were like, we're holding on to our own over here. We don't trust these crazy bastards over here in the West. And of course, the United States and Western European countries said, we don't trust those crazy bastards over in the East. Everybody thought the other side was an imperial power trying to beat the other side, and that's how you had the Cold War. The Iron Curtain falls, Europe gets divided, the Soviets hang out over here and help all these other countries recover from the war, and the United States and their allies help all these countries recover from the war, thus setting the stage for a divided Europe. It's the reason why I still have a Western Europe and an Eastern Europe chapter in the book. It's based on this, the last 60 to 70 years of human history. Actually, you could probably go back 100, okay? That's what's going on here. It is important to note, I think it's up here, in a way, remember all that shit Russia lost in World War I? They just got it back. They just got it back. They had to wait a few decades to another war, but they got back all of that territorial holding that Lenin gave away to the Germans, and all of those countries that for a time had declared independence, like Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Ukraine, they all declared independence in between the wars. No, the Russians took all that back. No, you're part of the Soviet Union now, again. And on top of that, now the Soviet Union has picked up more territory, not that they own outright, but that they kind of control. They kind of control that. That makes sense? Germany, of course, didn't fare so well. They lost all their empire and got not much in return. Do note, this is, watch the maps change. This is the Russian Empire circa 1914, World War I. And this is when the Germans and the Austro-Hungarians and everybody gets into the First World War I fight. And watch what happens. Watch Russia. Pay attention particularly to Russia. And from 1914 to 1919, that was the territory that Lenin gave away just to bail out of the war. Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. Ukraine's actually not showing up here. They had independence for a time. So 1919, they lost all that section, including parts of what's now Poland. This time, keep your eye on Poland for the next map. So 1919 is the end of World War I. Let's jump ahead to 1945. Let me go back and it show 1919, 1945. Look at Poland. Watch Poland. 1919, the whole country just gets picked up and moves to the left. How do you do that? Let's look at that again. Poland, you're here? No, you're over there, all right? And what happened? Hey, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, I love you guys. Where'd you go? You went away. Right? They were sovereign states for a while, then they disappeared as the Soviet Union reabsorbed them. Okay? So Russia got all their shit back and more. Because what they did in Bulgaria, Romania, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Poland, East Germany, is they said, hey, we're going to help you recover from World War II. Okay? We're going to lend you money and help you rebuild. And we'll also do this. We're going to help you reestablish your governments because your government got crushed under Hitler. So we'll help you have a vote. So the great honorable Soviet Union helped hold elections in all of these countries. And lo and behold, what political party won every single vote in all those countries? The Communist Party won in Bulgaria and Romania and Czechoslovakia. These places became puppet governments of the larger Soviet Union. Please note this. Do I have it in this slide or the next one? Okay. Thus, the Soviets cemented their influence in Europe and created a buffer zone. The Soviet Union did not take over Czechoslovakia. They did not absorb it. They said, no, you're a sovereign state and you're under our control and you're a buffer zone to keep those crazy Europeans at bay. Got it? Okay. I think what I wanted to show you here was that there were kind of three different ways this could go for these territories in Eastern Europe. You could have full-on absorption. Full-on absorption. Parts of Poland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, you see that after World War I were independent for a while, and they just get fully absorbed. So there are areas that the Soviet Union just said, nope, you're ours, you're part of our territory, period. Okay? And some of them, but not all of them, became republics. And here's a map of the republics. Remember, the USSR stands for the Union of Republics. Soviet Socialist, blah, blah, blah in the middle, all right? Union of Republics. Some of these places, like Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, became republics of the USSR. Kazakhstan was a republic, the Kazakh SSR, the Turkmen SSR, the Georgian SSR, the Ukrainian SSR. What are all these things based on? What are they based on? People. Ethnicity. You're Estonians. You have your own little republic, part of the USSR. You Kazakhs, you're the Kazakh people. You have your own republic, part of the USSR. You can see modern-day states of today's world based on these republics that the Soviet Union made into a collective, single sovereign state. But they let them maintain some idea of separateness as a SSR based on ethnicity. Does that make sense? Yes? So that was the other way that you could go. And again, you can see all the states of Central Asia. They just became independent after the Soviet Union went away. Same with Georgia, Armenia, back to Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. That all became independent states again after the Soviet Union collapsed. Okay? So absorption, full absorption for some territories. Some were made into republics. And there were the satellite states. This feels like easy exam questions that people always miss. The satellite states were all these states of Eastern Europe. They were separate sovereign entities. Sovereign! Remember that lecture way back when? They were sovereign. Czechoslovakia and Poland and Bulgaria, they had a seat at the United Nations, and every other state in the world recognized they were sovereign states. But were they really fully independent? Not really. That's why we call them satellites. They were states in orbit around the Soviet Union. Okay? Estonia, SSR, did not have a seat at the UN. It was part of the USSR. Okay? Poland was a sovereign state. It had a seat at the United Nations. But it always voted for anything the Russians wanted. It was basically a puppet state. All of these satellite states were AKA puppet states. And I will ask you something to that effect on the final exam. I'll say something like, hey, was Poland absorbed, a republic, or a satellite? Think you can get that right, the final exam? Okay, good. Pretty straightforward stuff, but it does help you understand today's world. And here's what helps you understand even more. The Soviet Union, in a bid to counter who created the Warsaw Pact? NATO. When the Soviets refused to leave Hungary or Poland and refused to let Estonia be free, Team West, led by the United States, said, hey, these guys are imperial. They're aggressive. They may take over all of Europe. So we need to form this North Atlantic Treaty Organization to make sure that does not happen. So you already know Article 5, right? Everybody remember the 5? Article 5? Basically saying, hey, Soviet Union, you even think about messing with Luxembourg, and you will bring down the wrath of God on your ass from above. All NATO members will respond if you invade Belgium. And in response, the Soviet Union said, so what? We got this, because we think you're imperialist bastards, and so we're forming the Warsaw Pact with all of our puppet states who do everything we say. And you just try to take over Czechoslovakia, and we'll all attack you, just like the thing you have. NATO, Article 5. Anybody ever seen the movie Stripes? Sorry, I'm old. So if you want to see Czechoslovakia get invaded by Bill Murray, go watch a movie called Stripes. It's hilarious. All right. It shows the end days of this whole situation. But when the movie was made, the Iron Curtain was still up, and there still was a Czechoslovakia. So the Warsaw Pact feels like a test question, invented and created to counter NATO. And thus now you have two military organizations facing off against each other. That was the Cold War. NATO versus the Warsaw Pact. All right. And that's where we get the last 60 years of human hilarious history of these two powers, these two entities, these two teams, building up a shit ton of weaponry just in case the other one attacked Belgium or Czechoslovakia. In hindsight, it sounds goofy as shit. And I'm assuming 500 years from now, we'll find it even more hilarious than we do now. But that was the whole background for the Cold War. They're going to take over the world. No, they're going to take over the world. And so we all need 1 billion nuclear weapons to make sure that everybody's dead in case the other side tries to take over the world. You won't get the world. We'll nuke them all to death. Both entities pretty much thought that. For those of you that can't read the legend in the back of the room, it's showing you kind of Team West, although why Iran's lit up there, I'm not really sure. Mostly NATO members here in green, and these are sites of missiles, airfields, intercontinental ballistic missile sites that were located on both teams, all pointed at each other. Yeah? Does it say we have a nuclear base in Iran? Yes. At one point, this is showing you 1949 and 1959, Iran was a U.S. ally up until 1979. Till the Shah got thrown out and they had their Iranian Revolution. So yes, there were U.S. bases there. In fact, one of the ways, you guys want an easy trivia question for the final exam? One of the ways that we helped the Soviet Union during World War II, one of the main resupply routes, let me say this again, say it slowly, make sure I say it right. One of the main resupply routes where the United States funneled guns and stuff, supplies to the Soviet Union, was through Iran. It's through Iran. We couldn't cross through Europe, that was a battlefield. So up through Iran, we funneled up through the Persian Gulf, and then through Iran, we helped refuel the Soviet Eastern Front against the Nazis. So the U.S. had a vested interest in Iran for a very long time, as did other Allied powers. Russia did too. Make sense? Okay. Sorry for the World War II trivia, but Iran actually is a very central player in a lot of things, kind of on the side. Kind of on the side, but it's still important to world history in a big way. So, to sum up the Cold War before we get on with how it all came to a crashing end, why was there so much mistrust and hate between these entities? I mean, they came together to kill Nazis. What else in the world would unify people besides killing Nazis? And soccer, I guess. But why then did it fall apart so quickly and escalate into a weapons drive to make sure you had enough weapons to kill everyone on the planet? Here's a bunch of bulleted points, and I'm sorry if you guys can't read the red from the back of the room. I'll try to read it to you. From the Russian standpoint, what I always try to do in this class is not make you feel sorry for Russia, not make you love Russia. I want you to understand Russia. I want you to understand why the Soviet Union did what it did and why maybe there's still animosity between our countries to this day. From the Russian perspective of the last 100 years, Russia was pretty much dissed after World War I. They were helping the good guys in World War I too, and the European allies just let them fester and let them rot. Again, it was mostly Russia's fault they even got involved in World War I, but they just got dissed. They got left out in the lurch because everybody was too busy fighting the Austro-Hungarian and German Empire. So they got dissed, even though they tried to help their allies after World War I. The West also abandoned Spain during their fascist period. And let me explain that very quickly for those of you who can't read that bullet. What we had forming up was not just a military fight between these major powers, but an ideological one, obviously. They were communists, we were capitalists. Fighting for the soul of the world. What system would win? And the United States and our allies would say, we stand for human rights and freedom and democracy. What's more honorable than that? And the Russians said, oh, really, do you? Because Spain, throughout all this period, was having a civil war in which a fascist dictator won and killed lots of his own people. It's kind of like a mini Hitler. And the European allies and the United States said, we're not going to touch that one. We're going to leave that alone. The Soviets actually sent in people to help. They were sending in people to fight for the rebels, to fight for communism/democracy, whatever you want to call it. Okay? And so the Russians looked at that from their vantage and said, you guys are full of shit. You don't support individual human rights and freedom and all that nonsense. That's what you say, but Spain's in your backyard, and that's a fascist dictatorship. What's up with that? By the way, let me continue that. the Russians for the last 50 years have said, whatever. The West pretends like they're the good guy. Oh, wait a minute. The good guys who supported Saddam Hussein. Oh, the good guys who supported dictators in Latin America. Oh, the good guys who do all of the CIA operative stuff secretly and kill people. So again, I'm not saying I don't like America. I love America. Hell yeah. I'm saying from a Russian standpoint, they look at that and say, no, they're hypocrites. They're not really doing what they say they're doing. So particularly this started in the Spanish Civil War period where they said, no, they're not really as good guys as they say they are. The next bullet says the West helped fight against the Bolsheviks. That is true. When the Communist Revolution started, under Lenin, most European countries and the U.S. said, that doesn't look cool to us. So we didn't openly do it, but we quietly helped fund the loyalists and people fighting against the communists. And they didn't forget that. Okay? That's a pretty easy one to understand. The West, as I've already pointed out, the West had invaded Russia many times. Russia never invaded the West. Again, I'm not touting them as heroes. I'm saying from a Russian standpoint, hell, we never did nothing to them. They invaded the shit out of us. They're the aggressors, not us. On top of that, they saw NATO expansion as very aggressive and possibly lethal. So when NATO started up this whole thing, Russians were like, hey, whoa. We were just allies in World War II. Why are you guys forming this shit up? It feels like you're coming after us. Which is kind of true. And that's why they came up with their Warsaw Pact. Yay! All right? So there is some truth to this when you look at it from another perspective. Let me add to this, definitely an exam question. This NATO growth, which started 60 years ago and pissed off the Russians then, when they were the Soviet Union, continues to this day, and it pisses off Russia still. So again, from the Soviet perspective, from the Russian perspective, they would say, you guys have a military organization that has continued to grow and get closer to us for 60 years. How are we supposed to feel about that? You keep saying you're the good guys, but you have a military organization that's growing to our borders. How would you feel about it if we started a military organization in Latin America? And it was Russia, China, Brazil, Chile, Argentina, and we started adding on Nicaragua and maybe Mexico. How do you think the U.S. would like those cookies? Or should I say burritos, all right? The United States would not stand for that. We'd be like, oh, hell no, we're going to preemptively bomb the shit out of something, all right? Give us a target. We're not going to have a military organization creeping up our spine. That's what's been happening to Russia for 60 years. Again, do I think they're the good guys? No. I think they're probably being a little overreactive to it, but got to look at it from their perspective. Finally, Stalin was utterly convinced that the West was completely full of shit. Completely. He was nuts, but he truly thought, nope, the West is nuts. They've done nothing that makes me think otherwise, that they want to take over the entire Soviet Union and the world. To a certain extent, he was kind of right about that too. The U.S. does promote democracy and capitalism. It's one of the things we do. Unabashedly, we believe in it. I don't have a problem with it personally, but if you're not a part of that system, then you do have a problem with it. So as much as we were afraid that the Soviets were going to take over the planet, they had to equal fear that we were going to take over the planet. By the way, we won, but chimes are changing, all right? From the Western standpoint, communists had started a war with Finland, and we love Finland, all right? Who doesn't love Finland? By the way, possible exam question, who won that war? Finland did. We had a Cold War with Russia for 60 years. We never fought. We never actually shot at each other. The only country that's actually beaten the Soviet Union was Finland. Then, of course, it beat itself later, but Finland had a land war with the Soviet Union, and Finland won. In a related note, what European country is not a NATO member and never ever will be? You could probably name a couple. Switzerland, that's good. I like both of these answers. Switzerland, not a part of NATO, never ever will be, because Switzerland don't like to be a part of nothing, all right? Except cuckoo clocks and shit, all right? So Switzerland out for obvious reasons. The other country that's not a NATO member, never will be, is Finland. Finland is not a NATO member on agreement from this war. On agreement from this war, the Soviets said, hey, we need to grab territory from Finland because they're going to join NATO and that's on our border and that's too close. And when this war came to the skirmish came to an end, during the peace negotiation, Finland basically said, okay, here's the deal, Russia, Soviet Union. We agree, we understand that it would be threatening to you if we join NATO. So even though we're buddies with all the NATO countries, we promise, Scouts honor, we won't join NATO. We're friends with those countries, but we won't join to make you feel better. That was the case now. It still is the case today. That's why. So Finland would come help us out if we needed them. They'd send in like a reindeer herd or some shit, whatever they got up there, all right? Dudes on reindeers with shotguns, probably. But that's why they're not in NATO to this day. So we looked at as aggressive from the communist standpoint. They tried to take over Finland. The commies had, after all, originally signed up with Hitler, and that's enough to condemn you to some level of hell in and of itself. Yeah, you hung out with Hitler? You had a pact with Hitler? That's like saying you have a pact with the devil in today's world. So how can you trust these commies? They were hanging out with Hitler, assholes. So of course we don't trust them. They wouldn't have actually ever done shit had Hitler not invaded them. So yeah, they're our good friend during World War II because they had no choice. So we didn't really trust them that much from the get-go. Commies had absorbed large parts of Eastern Europe, we now know, we've already discussed. Commies had helped other communist uprisings, particularly in Greece. A country which apparently is never out of trouble. Even 50 years ago, they were in trouble. For those of you that don't know, Greece had a communist insurgency in it, and to counter it, the West, Team West, helped finance a fascist who crushed all the people of Greece into compliance. And it was nasty business. Nasty business. And again, the Russians would look at that and say, you guys are so full of shit. You're supporting a fascist in Greece who's killing his own citizens. And that was kind of the case for a while as well. By the way, back to NATO, back to Western Europe in general, this is one of the reasons why we count Greece as part of Western Europe, even though it's not really close to Western Europe, is it? Think of a mental map of Greece. Where's it at in Europe? It's way over here. It's not in Western Europe. It's over in Eastern Europe. But Greece is classically and historically counted as Western Europe. That's quite intentional. We wanted to keep them on our side, and so we helped sponsor the government to make sure they stayed in the Western category. Okay? All right, are there any other Western standpoints? Yes. And we were utterly convinced that commies were promoting worldwide revolution. Not surprising, they were. Just like our team was. So both parties were trying to promote their ideology across the planet. We didn't trust them. We didn't like them. Thus the Cold War. Now, maybe you've had this in other classes, but we're getting old enough now, I say we as a nation, and you guys are young enough as individual people, that it's hard for us to understand this level of hatred during this whole Cold War period, because I'm older than you, obviously, times 2. But even I don't get it. I mean, it's so far removed now from even my life, much less yours, that I have to go backtrack and be like, why did people believe this shit? Why were we afraid that communism was going to take over? How preposterous. We spent billions and trillions of dollars to make sure that communism didn't take over. Who cares? Let them do whatever they want. Be as communist pinko as you want to be. Who gives a shit? Have a communist party, all right? What we have forgotten is we didn't live in this era. And there was a real and palpable, by palpable I mean you can feel the shit, fear in the American population. Fear! Not concern, fear! that these people were going to take over planet Earth and kill us all. What's the number one box office movie this weekend? Red Dawn. Red Dawn, which has been remade. You guys know it was a remake, right? Who invaded America in the first Red Dawn? Russia. Going to take over. Now, actually, that was a hilarious, funny 1980s movie that actually was not that popular when it came out because only I know this historical context because I'm the exact right age. The original Red Dawn came out right after the Communist Union fell apart. Right after the Berlin was falling and everybody's like, oh, the Soviet Union's getting ready to die, is when Red Dawn came out. All the filmmakers were like, oh, shit. We totally missed our window on this. Because who the hell's going to be scared of the Russians coming? They're falling apart. But when they were making the movie, when they wrote the script 10 years earlier, it was fear, all right? And if you go back even further and ask your grandparents, maybe even your great-grandparents about this, back in the people who were alive in the 50s and 60s, they were shitting themselves scared. Shitting themselves. Because it feels like an exam question for these awesome people here, and you people online. We were in this great battle, an ideological battle with this group of people for control of planet Earth. But it was also a military battle, a technological battle, an economic battle, right? And one of the very first things that terrified U.S. citizens, let me check your knowledge. Something happened that the Ruskies were actually ahead of us. And they did something that I think in 1959 scared the sweet bejesus out of great American citizens. Sputnik. It was called Sputnik. Write it down. If I have Sputnik, thank you. The Russians in the audience correcting me, and I probably pissed him off so many times, he's going to hit me over the head with a vodka bottle later, all right? Which I encourage. The Sputnik was a satellite that the Russians actually were the first to beat us into space. And this satellite was probably about this big. They shot it up, and then it went into orbit around the Earth. And it just had a little red light on it, and it was just beeping, right? It was sending out a signal. You could physically see it in the air, and you could pick up the radio broadcast off of it. And when that sucker, it was just a little piece of metal, was going over top of U.S. airspace, people were literally terrified, and the world was going to end. And this meant that the Soviets had mastered space, and they could drop a bomb on your damn head anytime they wanted to. Now, again, some of you are snickering, and I too am like, okay, whatever. But we didn't live at that time period. And I can envision that maybe I would have been a college professor in 1959 who was like, holy shit, the sky's falling, run for the hills, all right? Get the hell out of here, the Russians are getting ready to invade. I'm writing the script for Red Dawn right now, all right? This game is on. But that was really the sense of what was going on in that time period. So decades of U.S. foreign policy was anything at all costs to stop this group of people who were going to take over planet Earth. And they felt the same way about us. Okay? So sponsor wars anywhere to fight their friends and build up a huge nuclear arsenal and do anything we can to make sure that these guys don't win. All right. So to finish off our 20th century tour, we have from 1950, give or take a few years, to 1989 was this full-on Cold War. They hate us, we hate them. We'll sponsor wars against each other, but we won't actively ourselves fight. We'll pay other people to fight. Feels like a test question. What are some fights that actually happened during the Cold War? What are some hot spots during the Cold War where it really was them versus us, but we weren't fighting each other, we were paying other people to fight each other? Vietnam was largely considered a hot spot in the Cold War, that the commies were helping the commies, and we were helping the other guys, and that's what was really a civil war and had nothing to do with the Cold War. Where else are some hot spots? The Korean War was a hot spot. The commies were helping one side, we were helping the other side. Are there any others of significant note? The Winter Olympics. Yes, when the Russian team got beat by the United States hockey team. Definitely. And I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you said over here. So you're saying Abkhazia? That one's more complicated, but you're right. Put that one on the back burner. Are there any other big ones? I think those are kind of the main ones. What's that? Afghanistan comes later in the game. Good call. Yes, in fact, let's go with that trifecta for easiness of exam questions. Definitely Vietnam, Korea, and Afghanistan became flashpoints where we were facing off using other people to fight each other. Okay? It's called a proxy war, by the way. We're not going to fight. We'll pay someone to fight on our behalf. You guys go fight them. All right, so growth of USSR as a global power, and of course this also is the exact time period that the United States becomes a global power. You could argue that the U.S. was a world power in 1900. It would be hard to argue it. The United States was a solid country. It was rich. It was doing well. But in 1900, the United States was not a global power. In World War I, they were becoming a global power. But by the end of World War II, the United States was a global power and one of the most badass global powers ever. And then we continue to be to this day. Russia was kind of on the same path. It was not a world power in 1900. It was getting its ass handed to it in multiple wars we talked about. It wasn't until the Stalin era and then after World War II that it becomes a dominant global power. I like to remind people about this because we get so wrapped up in our own cultures that we think, oh, this is the way it's always been. The U.S. has always been a badass. Russia's always been a badass. No, they weren't. 200 years ago, neither one of these countries figured big in any way, shape, or form in the global economy or anything else. Nobody gave a crap much about either one of these entities 500 years ago, or even 300 years ago. These two giant superpowers that faced off and shaped all of the world in which we now live is a product of mostly the last 50 years. Okay? It's actually a little unbalanced when you think about it. They've so shaped the world, but it's only in the last 50 to 75 years. Okay. Now we get to, this is how we shape the world, by the way. We become the first world, they become the second world, and all the poor saps who are left out, they're the third world. Let me give you another exam question. The third world, and maybe we've talked about this in a different lecture, it wasn't so much that teams 1 and 2 didn't want them, but the whole concept of the term third world started from what's called the non-aligned movement. Have you referenced that anywhere in the textbook yet? Go ahead and jot it down if you didn't. Non-aligned movement. Non-aligned movement. NAM. The NAM. And those were countries that said, mostly countries like India, Egypt was an original player. I actually think Yugoslavia was, Ethiopia, Brazil. These were countries that said, we're not interested in your Cold War. We don't care about either side. China, I think, was an original NAM. We don't really care about your ideological war. We're just trying to get along. And we're not going to pick a side because we're not going to fight for either one of you. Does that make sense? So while the U.S. and the USSR were busy mounting gigantic arsenals to destroy each other, there were countries that said, we don't want to play. Many countries sided up. That's where we get Team West. To this day that I reference, Team West is largely a product of this era. All the countries that said, oh, we're on your side, U.S. We got you. If the Russians attack you, we're helping out. And we're like, thanks, Belgium. Send waffles after the fight, all right? Thanks, Australia. Send Kangaroo Fleet to come help us out. But you really see, even Japan is on Team West. This is where it comes from, is this whole Cold War era. I don't know that we really have a Team 2 anymore, because China and Russia were never really great friends. They've never really ever had a strategic partnership that one of them said, oh, if you get attacked, we'll come help. I don't think that's true to this day. So it's slightly different on Team 2, and the communist team went away anyway. But this Team 3 we still refer to as the third world. And it doesn't even make any sense, does it? Everybody knows what I'm talking about when I say third world, right? But it's a product of a bygone era. There's no Teams 1 or 2. Why is there still a Team 3? Some names just stick for whatever reasons. So the non-aligned movement was all those other countries that said, we're not siding up. I've actually never expressly talked about this in a lecture before, but I felt like doing it right this second because we're seeing a resurgence in the NAM movement now. Right now, feels like a really hard test question that only you people paying attention will get. Does anybody know where the latest meeting of the NAM happened? Yeah? Happened in Iran. It happened just a couple months ago in Iran, and it was a really big deal for Iran. When I heard this, I'm like, damn, NAM is still around? What? Why would that be? By the way, why would it be so important that Iran hosted it? Iran was like, yeah, woo-hoo-hoo! We're hosting the NAM, the Non-Aligned Movement. Booyah! It was a really big deal. Why? Because they hate the U.S., and it was legitimizing Iran. They get to say, oh, we hosted this huge grouping of countries, which still, even though there's no Cold War, still refuses to side up with the United States and Team West. There's no real Team 2 to side up with anymore. But they're making this kind of statement of, no, the world's a different place here in the 21st century. It's not the Cold War anymore, but it's still kind of a divided world where Team West is on one side and now Russia and China are on the other side. And the non-aligned movement is saying, we want to keep our options open. We want to trade with both sides. We might want to be friends with both sides. We're not going to play this team game. Okay? So here, I thought it was all said and done and the NAM would be no more, but it's actually rebounding in today's world and becoming an avenue where a lot of countries get together to talk about world politics and shit. By the way, the United States and all of Team West really pushed the NAM to not meet in Iran. We were really pissed off about this. This is current events. This is this semester. Okay? So you see how even though this Cold War stuff was kind of hilarious and it's over, it still shapes the modern world in so many ways, even though there is no more USSR anymore. So how was the Cold War won? If we didn't ever shoot at Russia, and we didn't have World War III, and there was not global thermonuclear war, where we all died, what happened? And again, I'm talking in detail about this because I realized just last year that you're a group of people that all of this happened before you were born. That's how old I am. You used to just be able to say, oh, yeah, Soviet Union. People are like, oh, yeah. Oh, and the end of the Cold War, and people, yeah, sure, I remember that. Now you guys have no memory of it whatsoever, except out of textbooks, because it's all over. So how did this era of human history come to an end? How was the Cold War won? This is a better example of a Cold War. Surprised someone hasn't shouted this out yet. Anybody know who the Russian dude is? Is he Russian, by the way? Is Drago really Russian? Is he really Russian? And his famous line was, I must break you. This is Rocky IV. See, you guys are so young, you've not even seen Rocky IV yet. But maybe you can associate with this Drago line, I will break you off a piece of my Kit Kat bar, all right? See, that reference you get. And that's just sad. Catch up with your Rocky. Come on. Greatest movies ever made. All right. Why did the Soviet Union cease to exist? Pretty much they went bankrupt. That's a good start. They kind of just went broke. And here are a few terms of why they went broke, because I want you to think about Soviet economy. And this is stuff that hopefully you've already went over in the textbook, so I'll go over this quickly. You can stop me if you have more questions about it. But in a communist economy, the state controls everything. They say where the factories go, who makes tanks, who grows corn, where the doctor's offices go. They get to do all those great things we talked about Stalin actually did pretty well. And they did rise in industrial might and power. Okay? However, over the long term, this becomes a completely unmanageable system, as the Chinese themselves have now recently found out. When you try to control every single aspect of an economy, you're doomed from the start. And almost everyone on the planet has now accepted this. Even hardcore commies. Communism is a wonderful ideology. It's all about equality, and nobody gets poor, and everybody gets health care. It's freaking great on paper, all right? But when you actually try to do it, everybody now says, holy shit, that's impossible. That's impossible. It's like controlling the weather. There are too many factors involved. You're going to try to control every ear of corn, and every hypodermic needle, and every tank, and every tractor, and everything. A central committee is going to try to do everything. Forget about it. Everybody's given up on that. It just doesn't work. Economies are too big. They're too unpredictable. There's too many factors. It's one of the reasons why capitalism is so resilient is because capitalism, nobody's controlling shit. Nobody's controlling capitalism. Everybody says what the hell they want. And it kind of works. If it gets out of control, a government may pass some laws that say, hey, you actually can't have 3-year-olds working in your factory, all right? Hey, let's not do that. Hey, you probably don't want human waste being distributed in the streets. Hey, let's not do that, all right? Governments can pass laws. They suck at controlling economies. Okay? Yes? There were no checks and balances. And a communist system, whether it's in Russia, China, Cuba, or anywhere else. Because there's no internal checks and balances, they're often extremely corrupt very quickly. Very quickly. Because some person over here who's actually controlling this tank factory in central Kazakhstan realizes, I can steal all this money. I can pay my workers half. I can not do this. I can hoard this certain mineral or material, or I can sell it on the black market. People figure out ways to cheat the system so freaking fast. Just like you do in classes here at the university, all right? You will figure out a way to cheat it fast and black market all the information you need. So corruption is pretty endemic. And also, how hard are you going to work in a system where everybody's equal and all your pay is equal? If every single citizen in the country is like, yes, this is great, and I love equality, and I'll work 100 million hours a week to make sure my neighbor gets a loaf of bread. If every single person in society buys into that, you're golden. Don't work. Don't work. Because I'm going to say, I want 2 loaves of bread. Screw that fat bastard. I'm not working 100 hours a week. Screw those people. If I work 1,000,000 hours a week, I get paid the same loaf of bread. So why wouldn't I just work 1 hour a week and skate and hang out and hide somewhere in a closet at work? I'm going to get paid the same. Health care's free either way. Going to get a car no matter what. It's kind of a lowest common denominator. Humans are like, not all of us, but some of us are like, I'm not doing it. I will do the minimum. And that screws the whole communist system. So central economic planning is a disaster. The Russians found out first, the Chinese found out second, and really it's only a handful like the Koreans and maybe the Cubans that are still pretending like they're doing it. And who else? And Hugo Chavez. He's actually trying to rebuild it, but it's not working so well for him either. Taking over everything becomes very unmanageable very quickly. He hasn't taken over everything yet, and he can't even handle what he's taken over. Yeah?
Out of curiosity, what is it, how much of a problem lowest common denominator is?
I'm sorry, how much proof that, I still didn't follow your question. How much proof is there about the lowest common denominator?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. Beats me. Is that something that's provable? Yeah, so I'm sure somebody's done a study. I speak to human nature. I'm asking you as a group, hey, let's do a study real quick. Everybody, wake up your neighbors, wake up your neighbors. Let's play a game real quick. Honestly, be honest. I'm passing no judgment, I'll vote honestly as well. How many of you, if you could get a free car, free health care, and a free house, would work, and everybody else would get exactly the same thing? How many of you would work a 60-hour work week? Just 60, not 100. A 60-hour work week, you would work no matter what for 50 years if everything you got was free. Let me see. It's pretty. Free house, free car, free house, free car. Free health care, free clothes. Put them up. It's all you need. Put them up. All right, put them down. How many of you wouldn't do that shit for 1 damn second? Put them up. There you go. I just did a study, all right? And it was overwhelming that I'd say 95% of you. Someone still has their hand up because they're like, I'm not paying taxes either. Thank you, sir. Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of and it goes back to something called tragedy of the commons. If you rely on everybody else to do the right thing, then nobody does the right thing, if that makes sense. By the way, I'm not making fun of communism. Again, go read the original communist material that Marx and Engels and them came up with. It's wonderful social theory. Marxism was a very big deal on planet Earth for a while because people said, yes, this is the future. The future is equal society. Even though we make fun of it in hindsight, both the Russians and the Chinese and other places have said, no, we want an equal society. We want everybody to have health care. We don't want people starving in the street. We don't want babies to die young because people can't afford to get shots for them. That sucks. And it does suck. But the opposite, which is communism, which is the state doing everything, it just doesn't work. It just has not worked out yet. Yeah, Mohammed.
So in communism, there was no motivation. People were not motivated.
Yes and no. His question was, in communism there was no motivation. Oh no, there was motivation. Most of these systems start very strong. Remember we had to talk about China? And I talked about when they finally, in 1949, stood up and unified the country. Tremendous national pride. Tremendous national pride. People would work 100 hours a week, and they do it with a freaking smile on their face. And they'd go hungry with a smile on their face because there was a greater good that they could sense, that you could detect. You could see the future. You were working hard to make a better country. And Russia had the same thing. Under Stalin, when they were building up to a world power after getting the shit stomped out of them for the first 30 years of the 20th century, they were all about it. You could palpably see the country getting better. And yes, people would work. And it was a good idea. And what's wrong with social equality? That's awesome. I mean, quite frankly, maybe I'm being too blasé talking about how communism fails. We debate about social policy in our country today. We say, how much health care should we have? Oh, Obamacare, socialism, communism, blah, 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 blah. I mean, we want those things too. We just go about them in different ways to try to get them. Yeah.
There was no reward for exceptional people.
There was no reward for super exceptional people? No. You might rise in the party ranks. You might be identified as somebody. And if you were a super awesome nuclear scientist, I'm sure you would get to be in charge of a lab or some shit. But, I mean, no, I don't know there was too many people getting Mercedes-Benz as bonuses. In fact, I'm sure there wasn't. Yeah. We can ask a Russian. We have Russians here. It's time to play our game. Let's ask a Russian. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm assuming you could get rewards if you were corrupt enough.
You could get rewards if you were corrupt enough, he says. Oh, I like that one as well. Feels like a test question, although I don't know how, right? In the Soviet system, you could get a bonus if you are corrupt enough, says local Russian, right? In World Regions class. Yes, corruption is pretty easy, pretty endemic in the system. Damn, where does this class go? I have too much damn fun in here. Let's get past economic planning, because it doesn't work at large scale. And get to another thing which is part of economic planning, which is collectivized agriculture. And that is that under a communist system, everything is controlled by the state, including the land. Put an asterisk there. Collectivized agriculture is taking over the land, taking away property rights from people. So you can talk about, hey, the state's going to set up a factory or do this or tax or do whatever, provide services. Now we're talking about land rights. And this is something that humans have debated about for a very long time, too. So in the Soviet system, they said, no, you don't own land. Mother Russia owns land, all of the land. And we are taking over the land as part of our economic planning to decide where the crops will go and who will work those crops. It was forced collectivization. Because in any society, when you walk in and say, oh, by the way, this land that you and your family have been on for 200 years, that's not yours anymore. We're taking it, and you need to move away. People will get pissed, and people will fight. And this was a bloody business in Russia when they were unifying control of this economic planning, going in and saying, no, this is not your land anymore. You will move over here and work this plot of land as a unit. Or no, you group of people will actually all go to the city and work in the factories, and you people will now till all this land with a big tractor that they're going to make for you in the factory. Okay? So forced collectivization caused tremendous dissent within the Soviet Union, some of which is still being worked out. And they also, of course, sped industrialization, and I already referenced that during the Stalin era they did do this. So some of the stuff's not cool, it's not fun, and it didn't work in the long run, but in the short term, they caught up. They caught up. if I didn't make this clear already, one of the reasons why they wanted to catch up is so they didn't keep getting their asses handed to them. They wanted to equal the West, if not supersede it, for their own security. They wanted to militarily be equal, if not better. They wanted technologically to be equal, if not better. And they did catch up. And they did have a kick-ass space program. And they were beating the United States in space program and space exploration and possibly going to the moon and lots of different rocket technologies and military shit. They were winning in various elements. It seems, again, unthinkable in today's world because we're like, damn, the USA kicked so much ass. In 1950, it was a crapshoot. This was serious competition. Nobody knew who was going to win this fight back in the day. Okay? And so that gets back to your asking about, did people willingly be communist? Yes, they did during this period. National pride, security. There was as much propaganda in Russia saying that the U.S. was going to invade and kill all them as we were getting that the Russians were going to come invade and kill all us. So you had that sense of, oh, I better work hard for my country. That's the only thing you really got when all's said and done. All right. Now, having said all that, during this era, what is it that they produce? In this command economy that's forced collectivization, in speeding industrialization, trying to catch up and supersede the West, what did the Russians actually make? Vodka? Why did that have to come out? Did they make cars? Yeah, they made cars, terrible ones that have never been exported anywhere. Because what would be the point of making really nice cars? Yeah, they built for practicality. So you build practical stuff that people need. That's it. We don't need no flash. We don't need no bling. Okay? We're here for a greater purpose. Yeah. Yeah, I would have thought that would have been the first one, not vodka. What is Russia really known for? They still a major exporter this day? Guns, weapons, tanks, missiles, firearms. What's the best gun on planet Earth? AK-47. I won't say best. What's the most used gun on planet Earth? Write that down in your notes. Test question. The AK-47 is the most produced weapon ever. And it has been used in every battle pretty much for 60 freaking years. Everywhere. Why are they so awesome for you gun enthusiasts?
Because they're reliable.
They never break. Ever. They never, ever break. They always fire. You can fill them full of rocks and sand and beat them with a sledgehammer and pick it up and kill people with it. All right? It is an awesome weapon. If you like weapons. All right? So they are known for weapons, and write it down if you haven't already. They're one of the major exporters of weapons to this day. They still are. By the way, who's a probably close first or second? Who else is a major weapons exporter? Us. All right? That's right. I mean, our weapons and their weapons are used to fight battles all over the place. Sometimes in new proxy wars against each other. So, other things you might want to jot down is when you're focused on becoming a world power, you make big things, okay? You're going to make tanks and missiles and guns and automobiles, but practical ones, and bulldozers and tractors and petrochemicals. Big things, big stuff a big society needs to become powerful. What do they not produce? What's not listed here? Knickknacks, I like.
Small stuff.
Small stuff, like. Let's list them. Blue jeans. So let's widen that up to clothes. In fact, I have the awesome picture of a Russian Soviet fashion model there, all right? When you think of Soviet Union, what do you think of? When you think of a Soviet citizen, again, you guys are too young to really know it, but back in the day, people were like, yeah, that's what they look like. They wore bland clothes, almost like army garb, very plain. Their cars were practical, plain. That was intentional. It was intentional because what did they not make? Blue jeans, high fashion, knickknacks, video games, trinkets, pretty much 99% of shit in Walmart, probably 99% of shit you own. Stuff you really don't need, do you? If you have a fire at your house, what are the handful of things you're taking? Does any of the rest of it matter when it goes up in flames? You'll take Tetris? Oh, yeah, you guys did them at Tetris. Nicely played. All right? We are an economy that's focused mostly on consumer goods. Write it down. Test question. We're an economy that actually focuses heavily on consumer goods. That's what the Soviet Union did not do. And you can take it with a grain of salt and say, that sounds great, but it was part of their undoing. It was part of their undoing. Because as citizens of the Soviet Union, how many of you can afford a tank? Or a barrel of petrochemicals? Or a bulldozer? Or whatever. They didn't focus heavily on that other stuff. And I don't know what the percentage is. Someone can look it up. But consumer goods are a massive part of the U.S. economy. Guess what? Going into Christmas, it's a bigger one right now. And that helps fuel our economy. And people buy shit and sell shit and make shit, and people buy more shit, and the economy gets bigger, 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 bigger. Because the U.S. also makes tanks and guns and petrochemicals and bulldozers and airplanes. But we also do all that other shit. So we can sell you big ticket items. We can also sell you small ticket items. The Soviets never could. Their economy became very stagnant as you got into the 60s and 1970s and 1980s. It just wasn't as vibrant. It just wasn't as vibrant. Okay? So the bottom line at the end of the day was, by 1980s, again, you weren't born, you can't remember this, but what was always shown on news channels that I remember seeing is Soviet economy is in the shit house. Well, they wouldn't say shit house on the news. I made that up, all right? But, the Soviet economy is in the tanker. They're doing terrible. You would often see pictures on the nightly news of people waiting in line for a day and a half to get a loaf of bread. Now, it was certainly exaggerated. It was semi-propaganda, but there was some truth to it. And you'd see these people wearing like nasty-ass clothes by our modern opinion of clothes. You'd be like, dude, they look like they're starving to death, dying, and they're waiting in line for a potato, all right? What is going on? They just didn't, their economy did not have that vibrancy. They were spending most of their money on big ticket items. They also, please write this down, were spending a lot of their money helping their communist allies around the world. So they would give lots of money to Cuba. Let's put that one on the exam. They would buy all of Cuba's sugar at a very high price. Did they need the sugar? No. They were helping out Cuba because Cuba was a communist buddy. And they would give money to other nations to try to tempt them to be communists or support communist uprisings. They'd give tanks and money and guns to different places. Meanwhile, back home, they're producing these big things that no Russian citizen can buy. And they're also having an arms race with the United States. And that gets us to what I think is the funnest part of the Cold War period. And that's Ronald Reagan, the most hilarious U.S. president ever. Because Reagan, although a lot of people think that he was partially insane, and maybe he was by the time he got out of office, and a lot of folks think that maybe he had no clue what was going on. If he was clueless, the people that worked for him did know what was going on. And so when Reagan got into office in 1980, if you don't know your American history, that's okay, write it down now, test question. Reagan came to office in 1980. Right when all of the Soviet Union economy is starting to stagnate and they're getting overextended and things aren't really going that great, Reagan comes to office. Reagan. Hopefully you picked this up from the textbook. Ronald Reagan. Many see as the greatest U.S. president ever. Not me, I'm saying many, okay? Reagan, if you don't know anything else Reagan, please know this, he hated commies. He hated commies. Hated commies with all caps. Hated commies his whole life. Ratted out a bunch of Hollywood stars as commies back in the 40s and 50s. Hated commies when he was governor of California. When he got to be the big kahuna of the United States, he loved to hate commies. And so he came to office with almost a zealot's passion for destroying the Soviet Union. And he hated him so much, he was like, ha-ha, they're on the ropes, right? We know the Soviet economy is doing bad. And by the way, the American economy was doing bad in the 80s too. We sucked too, kind of like today. So Reagan's people actually did this awesome trick which worked out perfectly well. Killed two birds with one stone. They wanted to get the U.S. economy going again, and they wanted to push the Soviet economy into the toilet even further. And they did that by doing what? They did both things by doing Star Wars is one thing, but just building up arms is the main thing. An arms race. Now, we'd already been having an arms race with the Soviet Union for the whole Cold War. Reagan took it up a notch. Bam! Threw some pepper on it, all right? When Reagan got into office, he said, okay, here's how we can help the American economy. Let's open up more bomb factories and build more planes and more shit that can kill people because that provides jobs. Jobs are good. So we'll get the economy going by building more weapons of destruction, and the other bird that gets killed is, in doing so, we'll make the commies have to keep up with us, because that's what a race is. You have to keep up with the other runner. So the classic arms race really happened during the Reagan era, where we'd say, okay, let's build a new class of guided missile. Let's build a new class of intercontinental ballistic missile that we can put into somebody's bedroom window if we want. And we would build it and leak out enough information that we had built something similar to that. And the Soviets would be like, ah, shit, we got to build that too. And then we'd build one that had like a jetpack on it with an awesome with a windshield that people could man it personally if they want to. And the Russians would say, shit, we got to build that too. And then we built a tank that could go in reverse 100 miles an hour. And they have to build that shit too. Because you never know when your tank needs to go in reverse. And then we're going to build bombs that can circle Earth 10 times and then hit the Kremlin. And then the Soviets said, shit, we got to build a bomb that can go just as far and just as fast and just as big. Damn it, we got to keep up. And by the way, we're going broke. They were already going broke. And now they're overspending themselves to keep up with the United States. And, of course, for those of you that shouted it out, my friends from China, the thing that really put it over the top was Star Wars. Yes, the Star Wars system was the straw that broke the camel's back. By the way, of course, I'm oversimplifying the Cold War here. Stay with me. Tune out if you don't want to. That's cool, too. Star Wars was this awesome, what I think is the best historical bluff of all time, where Ronald Reagan and his team said, hey, we're building all the bombs and missiles and tanks that can go 100 miles an hour in reverse. What else could we do? Lasers! We need lasers in space. That maybe the lasers will shoot down other missiles, but maybe we'll just build a laser that we can shoot right at the Soviet president in the face with a laser, all right? From space, from the moon, all right? And then we'll have a Wookiee pilot something into the Kremlin and destroy them all from space. And this, by the way, was all made up, all right? It was an idea that I'm firmly convinced someone told Reagan at a drunken cocktail party at the White House. And he sketched on a cocktail napkin and was like, hey, dudes, can we build this shit? This is going to be hilarious. Lasers in space. Somebody put the CIA on this. This is great. Somebody talk to the Department of Defense. Let's do this. And so, of course, they leaked it. Oh, by the way, we're building lasers in space. And the Soviets were like, shit, we need to build lasers in space. Because our lasers got to shoot their lasers. And it got to that point that the Soviet Union economy was so screwed up, and they were going so broke, and they were having internal domestic problems, internal political problems, that when it came to Star Wars, they were like, dude, we can't even pretend. We ain't got no money for lasers in space. And so the president of the Soviet Union at the time, Mikhail Gorbachev, actually came to Reagan, and they had already started some negotiations to limit arms production because it was getting out of control. Everybody was like, this is getting out of control, dudes, come on. We have a bomb to kill every single Soviet Union citizen individually at this point. We don't need as many bombs. So they were already talking about limiting arms, but when it came to the space race, this laser shit, Gorbachev just came to Reagan and was like, dudes, okay, hey, let's do this. Come on. How about this? We'll stop producing this class of missiles and this class of tanks if you guys don't do the Star Wars things. That's what it came to be known as, the Star Wars system. And Reagan said, well, hang on, let me think about that. Actually, no, we can't. We can't stop doing it. It's almost done. And Gorbachev was like, oh, come on, dude, seriously. We'll stop doing this battle cruiser, and we'll not come into territory even close to you, and we'll stop the Hunt for Red October submarine from coming near your coast if you just stop the lasers in space guided by monkeys and shit. And Reagan was like, sorry, my hands are tied. This shit is on. I'm paraphrasing Reagan, all right? This shit is on. We got to have our lasers in space. And that was really, again, the straw that broke the camel's back. The Soviets were like, dude, we can't do it. We cannot keep up. And to ice that cake, Reagan then went on international television. And of course, it was national television in front of the U.S. Congress that was broadcast internationally. Right when all this shit's hitting the fan, he said, friends, we got to stop the evil empire. They're evil. We must stop evil. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall, you evil bastard. And so they actually hyped up and ramped up the rhetoric when they knew the Soviets were going broke and couldn't keep up anyway. And that's when it really is like, yeah, we're pretty much going to have to throw in the towel here. Oh, we only get 2 minutes left. Let me get to throwing in the towel. To add to this, and this is a movie we'll watch next week too, the Soviets decided to invade Afghanistan back in 1979 for reasons which still elude everybody, including the Soviets. They wanted to take over parts of Afghanistan, if not the whole thing, in order to press further and maybe take over Iran eventually and have a gateway out to the Persian Gulf. So they got involved in basically a 10-year war that's documented wonderfully in a movie called Charlie Wilson's War, which we'll watch next week in class. And that's why we mention Afghanistan as another proxy war where the Soviets got mired down, fighting a bunch of yahoos in the tough terrain and mountains of Afghanistan in a 10-year protracted war that gained them nothing. Does this ring a bell, by the way? A 10-year protracted war fighting a bunch of yahoos in Afghanistan. We decided to play part 2 of this particular war. And I'll just cut through the Afghan thing. I just want you to know, test question, this is referred to as Russia's Vietnam, much like America's experience in Vietnam, fighting a cause no one's really sure about for a territory no one's sure they want, that ended up in the tens of thousands of deaths and no tactical gain at the end. So Russia's Vietnam, that's Afghanistan, and they were pretty much, by 1989, they got the asses handed to them in Afghanistan and had to retreat out of there. When all of this that I've now described is crashing and burning, they were overspent and overextended. Obi-Wan must die. And in 1989, they pretty much threw in the towel. The Soviet government said, okay, all you Eastern European states that have been bugging us to be free, why don't you go be free if you want to be free, damn it. You don't want us to be the puppet master? Fine. If you really want independence, vote for it. We'll respect your vote. And of course, what happened? Everybody voted to run away from the Soviet Union. Everybody's like, hell yeah, we want out of that shit. The Berlin Wall came down. It's getting ready to be shown in a film here in a half hour. And by 1991, through this continued internal fracturing, the place is falling apart economically, politically. They let Eastern Europe liberate and go away. And then other SSRs start to say, hey, we don't want to be part of this shit getting flushed down the toilet. And so they knew the writing was on the wall throughout all 1990. Things are just deteriorating and deteriorating. 1991, write it down, final fact of the night. The Soviet Union, for the last time, meets and they vote themselves out of existence. Doesn't happen often. Doesn't happen often. Their legislator got together and they signed on the dotted line and said, we are no longer the USSR, we're now 15 individual countries. All you people who didn't want to be part of us, go away, and now we're Russia. Got it? And that, we'll have to play next go-around. That will leave off and get to modern Russia and then into the Middle East next Wednesday. For those of you that want to watch a film on East Berlin and West Berlin, that'll be a half hour up in McBride 100. Otherwise, have a great night. Thanks for partying. And thanks for all the input from class for our Russian, Chinese, and African friends in the Hizzle. Everything okay?